You know what's strange? Most of us grow up learning the exact same lesson. Follow the rules, do what you're told, stay out of trouble, don't stand out too much, don't make people uncomfortable, and for a while, that seems to make sense. Because rules create order. Rules keep things predictable, rules help society function. But then something interesting happens. The older you get, the more you notice that the people who leave the biggest impact aren't always the ones who followed every rule. They're often the people who question them, the people who challenge them, the people who had the courage to do something different. And if we're being honest, those people fascinate us. Think about it. Why do rebellious characters always seem more interesting than perfect ones? Why do certain entrepreneurs, artists, athletes, and leaders grab our attention so easily? Why do we secretly admire people who refuse to fit neatly into the box everyone else accepts? Have you ever wondered why? Because the answer reveals something important about human nature, and maybe something important about you too. Think about your own life for a second. How often do you stop yourself from saying what you really think? How often do you worry about what other people might say? How often do you have an opinion but keep it to yourself? Be honest with yourself. Most of us spend a huge part of our lives managing ourselves, filtering ourselves, editing ourselves, not because we're fake, but because we want acceptance, we want approval, we want to belong, and that's completely normal. Humans have always wanted to belong. But here's the thing. The part of us that wants safety often fights with another part of us. The part that wants freedom, the part that wants to express itself, the part that wants to stop asking for permission. And that's where rule breakers become so interesting. Because they seem free. Not perfect, not fearless, free. When someone says exactly what they're thinking, when someone takes a risk nobody else is willing to take, when someone chooses their own path instead of following the crowd, something happens inside us. Part of us admires it, part of us envies it, and part of us wonders, what would my life look like if I had that kind of courage? That's why even small acts of rebellion can feel powerful. Speaking up during a meeting, saying no when everyone expects a yes, choosing a different career path, ending a relationship that no longer feels right. These moments aren't exciting because they're dramatic. They're exciting because they represent freedom, the freedom most people quietly crave. And that's where most people get stuck. They assume their fascination with rule breakers is about rebellion. But it usually isn't. It's about authenticity. Think about it. Most people aren't secretly dreaming about becoming criminals. Most people aren't trying to create chaos. What they really want is permission. Permission to be themselves. Permission to stop performing. Permission to stop living according to expectations that don't even belong to them. What most people don't realize is that many of the people they admire aren't breaking rules just to break them. They're simply refusing to betray themselves. And those are very different things. The artist who creates what they believe in, the friend who speaks an uncomfortable truth, the person who walks away from a life that looks successful but feels empty. These people aren't always rebellious. Sometimes they're just honest, and honesty is surprisingly rare. Because honesty often comes with consequences. That's why it feels courageous. If you zoom out for a second, you'll notice something else. Rule breakers often seem powerful, not because they're stronger, not because they're smarter, but because they appear less controlled by other people's opinions. Think about it. How many decisions does the average person make based on what others might think? The clothes they wear, the things they say, the goals they pursue, even the life they choose. Now imagine someone who isn't trapped by that, someone who acts according to their values instead of constant approval. Wouldn't that automatically make them seem powerful? Of course it would, because confidence isn't always loud. Sometimes confidence is simply the willingness to disappoint people. That's a difficult truth, but it's true, and most people spend years learning it, slowly, painfully, one experience at a time. But here's another layer most people never think about. Our brains are wired to notice what's unusual. We notice what's different, what's unexpected, what's unpredictable. That's why rule breakers often become memorable. They break patterns. And humans pay attention to broken patterns. It's why certain people instantly stand out in a room. It's why certain stories stay with us. It's why we remember the person who did something unexpected while forgetting the 100 people who did exactly what everyone expected. Because predictability fades into the background, Difference grabs attention, and attention creates influence. But here's where things get interesting. Not all rule breakers deserve admiration, and deep down, we know that. Some people break rules because they're courageous. Others break rules because they're selfish. Some challenge unfair systems. Others create problems for everyone around them. There's a huge difference. One comes from conviction, the other comes from ego. One creates growth, the other creates destruction. And understanding that difference is important. Because the goal isn't to become rebellious for the sake of rebellion. The goal isn't to reject every rule. The goal isn't to become difficult. The goal is something much deeper. It's learning when a rule serves your life and when it limits your life. And that requires awareness. Think about it. This isn't really a conversation about rules. It's a conversation about identity. The real question isn't, do I follow the rules? The real question is, am I living according to my own values? Because you can follow every rule and still betray yourself. And you can break certain expectations while remaining completely true to your principles. That's why this topic matters. It's not about behavior, it's about who you're becoming. Over time, people slowly become the identity they repeatedly practice. The person who always stays silent becomes someone who no longer trusts their voice. The person who constantly seeks approval becomes someone who depends on it. The person who never takes risks slowly loses confidence in their ability to act. And that happens so gradually that most people don't even notice it. Years pass, opportunities pass. Entire versions of themselves remain unexplored, not because they lacked talent, not because they lacked intelligence, but because fear quietly became their decision maker, and that's the real danger, not the rules themselves, the fear behind them. So what do? You don't need to become rebellious overnight. You don't need to fight every authority figure. You don't need to become reckless. Start smaller. Speak honestly when you'd normally stay quiet. Express an opinion even if not everyone agrees. Set a boundary where you normally stay silent. Make one decision based on your values instead of other people's expectations. Small acts, simple acts, but meaningful acts. Because confidence isn't built through huge moments. It's built through repeated proof. Proof that you can trust yourself. Proof that your voice matters. Proof that you don't need everyone's approval to move forward. And over time, something changes. Slowly. You stop seeing yourself as someone who follows the crowd. You stop seeing yourself as someone controlled by fear. You start becoming someone who chooses deliberately, someone who thinks for themselves, someone who lives with intention. And maybe that's why we're so fascinated by rule breakers in the first place. Not because we want chaos, not because we want to rebel against everything, but because they remind us of something we've forgotten. The possibility of living more freely, the possibility of being more honest, the possibility of becoming more fully ourselves. And maybe the rule you're meant to break isn't society's rule at all. Maybe it's the invisible rule you've been carrying in your own mind. The one that says you need permission, the one that says you shouldn't stand out, the one that says you must always play it safe. Because the moment you stop obeying that rule, your life starts to change.